our next segment, and I really give a smile, Untek Kim is with me. And he's always been with me because we've known each other now for many years. He was in my classes at Juilliard. He was always a highlight for me. Whenever I saw him come into class, I said, there's a wonderful, wonderful young man. And he's turned into still a young man, but into a real artist. He has never left the love of the piano. That, I think, is the truth, isn't it? That piano literature just beguiles you, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, piano repertoire is so vast, and so there's so much to be, so much to offer. So yeah. It's fun to explore it.
It's beyond the word fun, really. It's almost like it's something that gives us so much back every time we're alone with a great composer.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, it's sort of like an exploration of the person whose music you're playing, and it's revival of that person as well. And
yeah, isn't it something? Yeah. The idea here, we're going to play two Prokofiev sonatas from his earliest years, and there you get to know a different Prokofiev. In the first sonata, you wouldn't expect this piece the way it is written. It's only one movement. It's in sonata form, and it's the work, what, of a 18 or 16-year-old?
He originally wrote it at age 15 during a summer, and he wrote a sonata in 3 movements at the time, but he came back to it a few years later and thought, second and third movements are not quite up to par, but the first movement is worthy of salvaging. So he extensively revised it. He must have been about 18 by that point, like you said.
An old guy.
Yes.
And yeah, it really, he loved the sonata allegro form. He really,
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a great, great formal genius. And he wrote 9 sonatas.
9 sonatas. And it was
a
working
little fragment, I think, of a 10th.
Right, correct. And
talk, yes.
Yeah, and he was brought up with a very conservative mother who had a taste for Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven. So he grew up hearing and playing these sonatas, and he was always very much fascinated by them. And also the fact that in his life, he was such a he had a passion for chess. He studied and played chess all his life.
Was he good?
I think he was quite good, in fact. He played a professional and won. I think it was, I might be making that up, but I'm not quite sure, but he was quite good. And his mindset worked in that way, very strategic, very calculating, and so the formality of sonata form was very appealing to his character.
Yes, yes. And he's never, though, scholastic. It's always, no matter how correct it is, it's always brilliant, effective, full of new things, even though it's an old form.
Yes.
Prokofiev is certainly one of the most performed composers in the world. Mm-hmm. This is a worldwide repertoire. He'll have his violin concertos played in Seoul or Tokyo or Moscow. It's not every composer that has the universal tang, so to speak. I mean, very few, actually. You can't export, let's say, Elgar to Italy very well, or even foray to Germany, or, it's a very, very difficult thing to be a universal master. Prokofiev certainly is that. And of course, as you know well, his whole output, he died in 1953. Tell us what happened that day.
Well, I might perhaps go back a few years back to explain that. And so in 1948, along with many major composers in Soviet Union, he was accused of writing formal music by the so-called Soviet Musical Committee, which devastated Prokofiev because it prevented him from getting his pieces performed. And this was during the Stalinist regime after the war. So things were quite tense, and he had to make formal apology on behalf of the Soviet people and say that he would improve his music, so on and so forth.
What a joke, huh?
Right, and then he died suddenly. He had a high blood pressure problem, and he had died of a stroke on March 5th, 1953, which was the same day that Joseph Stalin died.
I think within an hour of each other.
Correct.
Of the same kind
Same
of stroke.
city. Yes.
Well, that was not brought upon the world press at all compared. I mean, everyone in the world was, Stalin is dead. Stalin is dead. They didn't understand that a far greater man than Stalin died that same day, and it always once again tells us that art never, all authority, but art never will thrive in a totalitarian state. Impossible, it's impossible. And Prokofiev, Shostakovich, they lived very bad lives. And of course, the second wife of Prokofiev, she was sent to Siberia.
Was it second wife?
I mean, the first wife.
The first wife,
the first wife, yes.
who was a foreign wife. And
yes, and that being foreign was a very hard thing for her.
Right, and they did not make it covert either. When they arrived in the Soviet Union again, after living abroad for almost a decade or more, in 1936 they returned, and when they returned, they made sure that they lived abroad. They brought a car that they bought from Europe, during which almost no one in Soviet Union owned a car. They dressed in Western clothing, so could not have made a good impression to the Soviet authorities.
Yeah, so you had to make a good impression, especially a musical artist, because there's no message actually in instrumental music. And he suffered.
Yes.
He suffered. The marriage didn't, I think there were 2 children from it also. Yes. He was, though, a very, very, as Richter says, he was a tough man.
Yes.
It may not be a fun thing to have lived with him.
No.
However, the second wife seemed to do well with him.
Right. And it sort of seemed to have changed him. People said, what happened to the condescending attitude of this guy once he married the second wife? He was certainly somewhat nicer, I suppose. Not necessarily nice. But
maybe he was more frightened.
Perhaps.
For when the prodigal son came home to Russia, being homesick, as many Russians have been, he found that it was not going to be very conducive to him. And yet the first years were so productive.
Yes.
Going back to your sonata form discussion, he also wrote that classical symphony, which even goes into the Baroque forms in a way.
Yes.
Yes, he was an amazing pianist as well. All we have to do is look at the pianism of the 9 sonatas, and you have a new and important chapter in the history of piano technique.
Yes.
There are many, many good composers, but that didn't mean that they added to what the hands can do, and Prokofiev really did.
Yes.
So we're going to hear the first sonata. Do you want to play them together, or do you want to talk about the third for a minute?
We could separate them. Perhaps.
You want to separate them?
Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay, so we have this almost Scriabinic, very romantic, maybe a little Tchaikovsky here, a strand, and maybe a little Glazunov, which was one of his people at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, the director. And Glazunov's music was widely performed. And it's still good, but it's just not Tchaikovsky. Right. And we're going to hear a piece that I'm amazed that people don't start a concert with it or a second half, because it's very affable music and very turbulent and very romantic. Let's hear Untek play the first sonata, F minor. Does it have an opus?
Opus 1.
Yes, that's right. Opus 1. Think of it. That's one of the better Opus 1s in history, right? I'm going to the Prokofiev room. was wonderful, and I haven't heard it in a long time. And I hear, you know, certain small structural faults that, you know, put you on the edge. You played it with such great nobility. I just loved hearing you. I love the sound of it. And the piece, of course, not characteristic yet of the great Prokofiev. But number 2 already is in 4 movements, totally characteristic.
Correct.
It's the real thing in every way, and played worldwide all the time.
Yes.
Then the 3rd sonata, which we're going to hear now, is again that 1 movement plan.
Yes.
And I must say, I don't know if you agree with me, but this piece is perfect.
It is incredibly well crafted. It's perhaps the most well crafted, best crafted piece among all his sonatas.
You think so, really?
Because the form is just so tightly woven. The usage of motifs are just so well thought out.
It's packed. It's just packed.
Yes.
In its 7 minutes.
Yes, it is.
And everything is there. All of the kind of virtuosity he uses, that opening C major,
Yes.
the irony of the subject, the second. Oh, it's all there.
Right.
And it used to be the most played of all the Prokofiev sonatas, but that's because the others were not known yet. It took a long time. It takes a long time to get a corpus of works known. And now everyone is playing. Of course, the 7th sonata became the most popular. Now the 8th is doing well. It had never really had any. The 6th, of course, is doing well. It's a piece I'm not in love with. I just can't get it.
Okay.
The 5th, I really think is wonderful.
I love the 5th.
Just wonderful. The 4th, quite lugubrious, first movement especially.
Neo-Baroque, like you mentioned before. Yeah.
But this one, it never fails. Even a performance that's not as great as you may want it comes off.
Yeah.
And in your case, it's going to be great.
We shall see.
Of course it will. So, I'm going back to the Prokofiev room, and I am very happy to be hearing this 3rd sonata, number 3. Goodness, was that a pleasure? You know, it's wonderful to hear you because you get better all the time. And we can't say that about everyone, believe me. Many people do not get better all the time, and you are. And part of it is hard work, love, and intelligence.
Thank you.
In fact, to hear this piece and played so admirably, I was not thinking of anything but the music, which many times is not easy for 7 minutes. We always, what's happening in our, we're always the next thing.
Yes.
And here I was living in it, and really stunned by the perfection of the piece.
That means a lot. Thank you.
What a piece. Well, it's a masterpiece, and a masterpiece is not a trifle, that's for sure, in our world of incessant noise and junk. We must not forget about the junk, and we must somehow lessen it if we can't eradicate it. I'm a reformer at heart, as you understand, and actually a radical. So good to see you again.
Great to see you too, Mr. Dubal.
And I hope that as soon as you want to, you'll come back to our class. We have wonderful listeners. They're great. I want to thank again Sujatri Rasinger, who gives us the clavier house and these wonderful pianos and the fine engineering that's going on. And if you want to come here, you should. 790 11th Avenue, and you'll be welcomed. And of course, the pianos will welcome you too. What can I say? A perfect ending to a wonderful, wonderful class, the piano evenings. This is David Dubal. Thank you for listening.